Good morning, everyone. I am a very normal person, but I've ended up with a job that's not particularly normal, and I'm going to talk to you about how I ended up doing that today. And all of it really just came about because of a big decision that I made a few years ago, and that's what I'm going to talk about. This year is the centenary of Captain Scott's final expedition to Antarctica, and we're trying to recreate that journey. But the big decision that started all this off a good few years ago, I thought, what do I love doing? And I decided to extrapolate what I love doing to its logical conclusion and ended up trying to set myself a challenge that I was almost certainly going to fail. And the key thing was almost. I decided to cycle around the world, and it was the risk of whether or not I could do it that really got me excited. So I got on my bike, I set off from my front door, and I pedalled to Africa. And as the weeks turned to months, turned to years, I realised that actually the hardest part of this expedition was already over on the day that I'd summoned up the nerve to begin it. I still got very nervous about each bit that came along, but as I went, I realised that each bit that I worried whether or not I'd survive, this is crossing a desert in Sudan, I actually would end up not just surviving, but thriving. And I also really learned that the hard times, the really tough times, cycling through Siberia in the winter time, the times when I really wanted to give up, when I hated what I was doing and I felt weak and I thought, what on earth am I doing? These are the moods that lead to the future joys in your life, the rewards that make you feel pride and self-confidence. So I made it all around the world. I didn't have much money. I only had £7,000. Money's not a problem. You just don't spend any, sleep wild, eat banana sandwiches. I didn't really have any skill. You don't really need much skill. You just keep plodding away. And if you want something enough, then you can overcome whatever obstacles there are along the way. And so I made it around from the end of this journey, and I was thinking, what on earth am I going to do next? And I decided to walk across India. And despite the experience of those 4 years on the road, when I began this trip, I was still really nervous. My sort of Anglo-Saxon upbringing is very negative of all these doubts and risks and not wanting to fail and worrying about all the bad stuff, and that overcomes thinking about all the amazing positive things that would happen if only I had the nerve to get going and try and walk across India. And of course, once I began, as on all my trips, once I immersed myself completely in the journey, I felt happy and free and liberated. And once you become someone who is quite happy to sleep in ditches in the middle of nowhere underneath the stars, life becomes blissfully simple. The journey across India cost me £500, of which 300 was the plane ticket. I spent the last few years then just chasing what I love. I thought to myself that it made sense for my life to find what I love doing, find what I care about, find what really makes me feel and come alive, and then just do it, and do as much of that as I possibly can. So I've just been doing various expeditions. This was crossing Iceland on foot and by this little boat called a Packcraft, my new favourite toy. I'm really not a suitable person for this sort of life. I'm not a heroic muscle man at all, as you can probably tell, and yet I'm doing this because of the realisation from cycling around the world that I'm capable of so much more than I realised I was, and there's so much more potential within me than I ever realised. Running ultramarathons through the Sahara Desert is a very stupid thing to do, but the rewards of it when you come home are pretty transferable to real life, confidence and pride. Up in the high Arctic, life is so incredibly simple. You get up in the morning, you do what you do it very, very well, and if you don't do it well, you die. And I think that's a pretty good maxim to live by. When I become king of the world, this is how the world is going to operate. Just cut away the superfluous, and life becomes simple. I spent the first 2 months of this year rowing across the Atlantic Ocean. It was a pretty daunting, drooling, miserable experience. I was seasick for 2 weeks of it. We had very cheap food that we bought on eBay. It was horrible, and every little stroke of the oars was so stunningly irrelevant on the 3,000-mile journey. And yet, from the moment we set off, there was no possibility of escape. There was no way of getting out of this. And so, if you remove any option of escape or giving up, then there's no other option except to finish. So you just row little by little by little. You get across the ocean, and I realised I could have done this all along, even without the fact that I was completely forced to do it by setting off on the boat. It's quite a contrast to writing books, this elimination of excuses, where I couldn't find a publisher for my book, so I decided to self-publish it. I was very nervous about this vanity of self-publishing, the potential for the financial risk, the risk of looking like a total idiot. But I decided that the risks of just failing and looking like an idiot were worth it for the rewards of actually writing a book. And it's worked out very well for me. I've published a few books with a normal publisher, but now I've chosen to go back to self-publishing. I've chosen the freedom, the innovation, the creativity that this gives me. And for me now, the risk of doing stuff by myself and looking like a total idiot is worth it. And for the reward of having the freedom just to do things how I want to do. Here's me heroically hauling a sledge through the snowy wastelands on a really epic journey. This is a child's sledge I found. This is Rickmansworth as I set off to try and walk a lap of the M25 motorway. This one thing I'm really keen on now is just trying to eliminate excuses. We don't all have much time, we don't all have much money, but adventure is possible everywhere. So I came up with this idea of micro-adventures, which are provocatively mundane adventures. I set off to walk around the M25. If you can have an adventure here, you can have an adventure anywhere. There's no need for these excuses that you don't have enough time, you don't have enough money. I think you can think big about adventures, even within the constraints of our pragmatic, normal lives. The sledge broke, sadly, then we found a shopping trolley. This is a very silly trip, but the more that I do it, the more I think this is becoming integral to everything that I do. This adventure genuinely had all of the highs and lows that 4 years cycling around the world did, just condensed into one week in suburbia. And so I decided that it was such a success that I was going to practice what I preach, and I spent the entire last year only doing micro-adventures all around the UK, setting off to try and find challenging, difficult adventures, but within the constraints of not having much time, not having much money, not requiring any specific skills. And there's adventure you can have anywhere. And this is my own private little revolution, the micro-adventure revolution. This year, though, I'm heading back to the big stuff. Hopefully heading to Antarctica at the end of this year on a 4-month expedition. There'll be 3 of us hauling big sledges weighing 180 kilograms for 1,800 miles, a round trip to the South Pole, carrying everything we need for 4 months of our life. I think physically and perhaps psychologically this is the toughest trip that I've ever done. But all of this that I've done really doesn't require any particular skill. All it does is comes down to the 2 biggest things I've ever done in my life, which was being brave enough to have this big idea to try and cycle around the world. It was a bigger idea than I'd ever had before. And then by far the most terrifying thing I've ever done in my life, actually getting on the bike, committing to it and pedalling off away from home. Everything after that was quite easy. Thank you.